In the year 2024, there have been several great cross-medium transitions from games to shows and movies, as well as vice versa. For years I thought to myself, how successful could a AAA open-world Harry Potter game be? And what do you know, it turned out to be fairly popular, and more importantly to the bottom line, profitable. It would appear many executives have come to the realization just how profitable a high-quality game can be when attached to the right IP. The magic of IP is not a new realization, but rather just the reward of making a high-quality product. Hogwarts Legacy is far from the first title to leverage its IP, with its parent company of Warner Brothers having already done the same with both Batman and Lord of the Rings. But it's definitely more popular than ever. Let's go over 9 IP that are prime for a great game. Since I already made a comparable list about superheroes, this game will be focusing on non-comic book source material. Like that list, I will be picking a property, then giving a quick elevator pitch to a potential game idea. When going over each of these, I'm looking at what do I think can sell as well as what could make for an interesting game concept. Some of these may be a bit out of left field, like our first entry, Codename Kids Next Door. For those of you older than 35 or younger than 20, you may be unfamiliar with this series, but that doesn't really matter. The strength of this IP is not as important as the universe itself, lending so nicely to a video game. Like, how many of you honestly knew about Baldur's Gate, GoldenEye, The Witcher, or The Warriors source material before you had played those games? I believe the Kids Next Door IP could find a large modern audience given the right game. Imagine yourself as a new agent thrown into an established team with a plot line to take down the always threatening adults. Being mission-based, your treehouse could serve as a large hub where you get to leisure around, learn more about your teammates in between missions. Being a Kids Next Door game, there has to be an absurd amount of duct tape and bubblegum inventions and weapons to unlock and upgrade, not to mention all the crazy mounts you'd be able to customize. The main goal would be to immerse the player's imagination into this already childlike place. So I know I said no superheroes, but I was specifically referring to comic book characters. There have been quite a few not so incredible games over the years that my 10-year-old self can vouch for. Not the best game to get alongside your new GameCube. Gamers deserve a better class of incredible games, and hopefully someone can give it to them. I'm not sure what the plans are for an Incredibles 3, but for a game, I think a prequel would make a ton of sense. The events of The Incredibles take place around a fictional version of the late 60s, early 70s, while many of the flashback sequences occur 15 years prior during the golden age of heroes and capes. I think a romanticized version of the Golden Age would be perfect due to the abundance of heroes present, while also presenting a unique setting not really explored in very many games. Like many superhero games, a narrative-driven open world would be an ideal structure to really explore the superhero fantasy. Even though the game would be most likely titled after Mr. Incredible, I think a story surrounding an entirely new protagonist would be even more interesting. Think of something like Infamous, where the protagonist's goal is defined and established, while still allowing the player the agency to make choices that affect his story and abilities. Infamous is greatly centered around morality, and that's a direction maybe worth exploring, but at the very least I think there needs to be a focus on the ability side of things. Imagine having the choice between super speed and flight, or invisibility and shapeshifting. While not as popular as Star Wars or as iconic as Indiana Jones, the Planet of the Apes IP is ripe with potential for lucrative possibilities. With all the modern films ranging from good to amazing, I think now would be an ideal time to grow the series' audience beyond just the silver screen. Even though Andy Serkis's Caesar is perhaps one of the most iconic and well-written movie protagonists of this century, the Apes franchise has never been just about one character, but rather the timeless conflict and struggles that come with humanity in both apes and humans. With so many potential directions, what would be an interesting premise for a game? I'm sure you could think of a better idea, but I was thinking of a tribalistic world post-Caesar, maybe before this most recent film, where the player starts off with nothing, while slowly making alliances and climbing up the political ladder of primate society. Think of a map full of different ape cultures and even humans that you can either make enemies or ally with. The best comparison I could think of is a mix of a Bethesda-style game like Fallout or Elder Scrolls, but mixed with some political decision-making elements from, say, something like Fable 2 and 3. Just imagine a 5-second political ad, apes together strong. Next up we have an anime, and depending on who you ask, one of the best animes of all time, Cowboy Bebop. Space is the final frontier as well as a perfect setting for a retro-futuristic western. With such a strong cast, this is one of those games I think would make sense to focus on the original crew of Spike, Jet, Faye, Ed, and Ein. The episodic nature of Cowboy Bebop I think would lend itself well to a game that equates to a multi-episode expansion of the show. Not canon, but could be. I'm not sure what the correct term would be, but something it's structured similar to the Jedi series in scale and planet selection, but maybe with less Metroidvania elements and a little bit more open like Starfield. Now imagine that with a more fleshed out version of the bounty systems in Red Dead Redemption 2. Hopefully all that makes sense. The developers would have to nail the feeling of hand-to-hand combat, gunplay, and ship combat, as well as the quality of each individual story. But assuming each of those specific components are excellent, I think there's a blueprint for a potential masterpiece here. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, that was really bad, I'm sorry. But what I was trying to sing was the Back to the Future theme. Or I guess they're back to the past now? Well, nonetheless, the Back to the Future IP is timeless, stretching across generations at this point. What are we thinking? Maybe like a GTA clone that lets you jump around from 1955 to 85 to a super fictionalized version of 2015? Now that I think about it, maybe 2015 wasn't that far off. Well, not quite, but I do think it would be awesome to explore the concept of multiple versions of a singular map. An open world a bit on the smaller side, but focusing more on the minute details that help differentiate between each place and time. Depending on how ambitious the developers are, we could even have branching versions of the same year. You could go with a retelling of the classic trilogy. That's not a bad idea, but I think it'd be more interesting to tell an original story that borrows heavily from the source material, with even a few of the same settings, but mixed in with some new ones. Imagine how heavy it would be to visit 2055 or go all the way back to 1775. Where are all the good pirate games? Sea of Thieves has been doing well for a while now, but may not be everyone's cup of tea, or maybe bottle of rum. Assassin's Creed Black Flag is perhaps many players' favorite title on the open seas, but that came out well over a decade ago at this point. Black Flag's publisher Ubisoft recently put out Skull and Bones, but that ship sank rather quickly. Why not make a top-tier Pirates of the Caribbean game? This franchise has seen better days, but a great game is one of the few things outside of a good movie that could really help set this franchise back on course. As far as the game itself, just imagine a more modern, larger version of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, but within the Pirates of the Caribbean universe, with more of an emphasis on adventuring, a little bit less assassinating. Instead of markers everywhere, think of a more divergent open world like that of a Rockstar title. Now that would be epic. Narratively, I feel you would have to structure the story around Jack Sparrow, perhaps an early prequel, with him working his way up the rankings of piratehood. I just feel the possibilities are extremely deep. There have been quite a few 007 games, but not many of them are considered even good, and so I feel we are overdue for a great game. GoldenEye is beloved by many, but the fact that that game is a bit outdated and still considered the best kind of goes to show how overdue we are for a great game. Like many of the other IP mentioned on this list, Bond is a very malleable franchise, and so there are a lot of things you can do with that character. You could easily make a Bond RPG where you create your own 007 and then upgrade stats and specialize in certain abilities. But just ahead of that, I think an Uncharted-like action-adventure would suit the character best. For one, James Bond killing 100 dudes then chilling on the beach with a vodka martini an hour later feels more in line with that character over, say, Nathan Drake. If we don't go with a create a Bond, I think going for an entirely new Bond would make the most sense. In fact, we could just de-age Idris Elba and finally put him in the role. If not, Troy Baker is always a phone call away. Regardless, as long as Bond is smooth, the tense action is present, and the drinks are shaken not stirred, the possibilities are there. I'm not sure if Keanu Reeves' inclusion in Cyberpunk 2077 moved the needle on sales, but he sure is breathtaking. Speaking of taking people's breaths away, I think it's time for a John Wick game. The John Wick series already feels like a movie adaptation of a game. You have bloody revenge, fast cars, long and varied corridor sequences, and lots of shooting. Imagine a linear tight third-person shooter with slick melee finishers and dead-eye combos. You'd have a little bit of Max Payne, a little Gears of War, a little Hitman, and even some Sifu all blended together. The narrative doesn't even have to be all that complicated or deep. As long as there's a relatable and tragic motivation, we're good to go. Playing the game would need to embody the ultimate power fantasy while having a diverse array of enemies, locations, and scenarios. Setting the scene, John Wick drives his Mustang into an industrial area. Immediately a gang opens fire. John returns fire while ramming into a group of enemies. He gets out and then hip tosses the one remaining guy left, finishing him with a bullet. He then opens a large door to find a dozen men waiting. We then go into a slow motion state similar to Deadeye where he takes out a huge portion of them. John dives for cover and then systematically takes down the remaining opposition. Alright, now someone listening, go ahead and make that game and get it funded, and I won't even need to be in the credits. In the number 1 spot, we have Avatar, the bending one, not the blue one. Similar to Hogwarts Legacy, I have felt for a while a high quality game in this universe could just print money, and I'm surprised that no one has really tried. Like many of the properties mentioned on this list, there have been games, in fact I've played several of them, but most of them suck. Imagine a game taking place in a pre-Last Airbender universe where you start off creating your own avatar, and then picking your base element as well as some of your background details. Gameplay-wise, you're constantly upgrading your moveset while eventually expanding your skill set to include other elements. There could be multiple places and people to pick up new moves and information while adding some replay value. And then narratively, we could have some sort of non-nation-based order like that of the Red Lotus threatening the world's harmony. The in-game world would have to be large enough to capture the sense of adventure and exploration of the source material. This is one of the few IP I feel publishers could really justify investing the time, money, and resources needed to actually make this come to life. Between the original animated series, a brief comic book stint, the sequel series, a god-awful movie, a decent Netflix adaptation, there's clearly an appetite from fans of multiple generations to get their hands on more Avatar. I'm no developer, but hopefully putting this out there will help manifest it. So there's 9 intellectual properties that, in my humble opinion, could both be interesting from a gaming perspective as well as lucrative. I try to keep my list interesting with some less obvious choices mixed in with some that we all want. What are some no-brainers that I may have left off? If you like the video, I'd appreciate a like to help the video grow. As always, I appreciate you for watching, and until next time, see ya!